The smell of smoke still clung to my hair the day she strutted into my courtroom like she owned it. I sat there in my black robes, gavel in hand, staring at the woman who had burned my house down just a week earlier. The audacity made my blood boil. Bryn Ashworth Sterling had no idea what kind of storm she'd walked into. When you torch a judge's home, you'd better pray she never gets the chance to serve you justice, and I was about to make sure she got every ounce of it. 6 months before my home became a pile of ashes, I was Judge Miriam Blackwood, respected, composed, and quietly broken. My husband Harold had just lost his fight with cancer, and the silence inside our Pinewood Estates home was unbearable. That place, once filled with laughter and the smell of his favorite bourbon, had turned into a tomb. The only thing that gave me purpose was the memorial fence Harold and I had planned before he passed, a 6-foot cedar barrier we called our sanctuary. That's when she appeared. Bryn Ashworth Sterling, the self-declared queen of Pinewood's Homeowners Association. She was the kind of woman who made small-town life feel like a corporate war zone. Perfect hair, expensive yoga clothes, and a Tesla that gleamed like a silver bullet. She smelled like money and control, the kind of person who'd call the cops if your mailbox didn't match your neighbor's shade of beige. I met her the morning I was planting the final row of roses along Harold's fence. The sun had just warmed the dew, and the air smelled of fresh cedar and soil. Then I heard the sharp click of high-end boots on gravel. "You must be the widow," she said, voice colder than the November air. No hello, no sympathy. Just the word widow, like a title she could use against me. "Judge Blackwood," I corrected, brushing dirt from my gloves. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Judge, we have a problem." She whipped out a pink tape measure and let it snap open with a sound like a gunshot. 6 feet, 2 inches. Pinewood regulations say fences can't exceed 6. Her voice had that sugary tone people use before stabbing you in the back. I stood, bones aching with fatigue and grief. "Show me that regulation," I said evenly. She flipped through her leather binder with the smugness of a queen counting her jewels. But I knew the rules better than she did. There was no such limit. I'd hired a surveyor to be sure. After 5 minutes of fake searching, she gave up, cheeks tight with irritation. "Well, we'll see about that," she snapped, marching off, perfume trailing like smoke. That's when I remembered her name, Sterling Premium Builders. 3 years ago, her husband's company had tried to scam an elderly veteran out of his savings with fake roof repairs. They'd stood before my bench, and I'd ruled against them hard. It all clicked. The fence wasn't the issue. I was. And Bryn Sterling had just declared war on a woman who spent her life studying the battlefield of the law. Within 2 weeks, the harassment began. Thick envelopes started piling up in my mailbox, official letterhead, gold embossed. Notice of violation, each one red. My mailman started giving me that pitying look people reserve for widows and unlucky gamblers. Violation number 1. Unauthorized decorative garden feature. Harold's memorial stone apparently, quote, disrupted neighborhood uniformity. Violation number 2. Non-regulation mailbox color. My black mailbox, unchanged for 20 years, was suddenly a crime. Violation number 3. Excessive bird feeding. The single feeder I'd hung for the cardinals Harold loved was now a nuisance condition. Each letter demanded fines from $200 to $500, threatening liens and legal action. I could almost smell the smugness in her perfume as I read them. But Bryn had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd been enforcing Colorado law for 2 decades. I knew these notices violated half the state's HOA statutes. No hearing procedures, no evidence, no proper citations. So I started fighting back. Evenings in Harold's old study turned into war councils. The smell of his pipe tobacco still lingered in the air as I built my case. Photographs, copies of bylaws, timestamps. I even logged her visits down to the minute using my new security cameras. One Thursday morning, while I was sentencing a DUI offender, those cameras caught Bryn trespassing. She'd brought her so-called inspection team, A skeletal interior designer dressed like a ghost and a muscular trainer pretending to be a property inspector. They pranced around my yard taking fake photos of violations, pointing at my rose bushes as if they were toxic waste. That evening, my neighbor Walt Henderson came knocking. Walt had lived in Pinewood since the 60s, a retired math teacher who still smoked cherry tobacco and wore suspenders that jingled with keys. "Judge," he said, lowering his voice, "that Bryn woman's been running people off this street. The Rodriguez family? Fined till they had to sell. Mrs. Morgan? Forced to rip out her husband's memorial garden. She calls herself an HOA president, but she's a tyrant in yoga pants." As he spoke, everything fell into place like courtroom evidence. This wasn't just a feud. Bryn was systematically targeting elderly and minority families, fining them into submission and driving them out. The pen in my hand dug into the paper until my knuckles turned white. Bryn Ashworth Sterling wasn't just a petty neighbor. She was a criminal masquerading as community leadership. And she'd made one fatal mistake. She'd chosen to fight a woman who lived for justice. The next strike came on a Tuesday. My security system pinged while I was in court. When I checked the footage that evening, my heart froze. Bryn had broken into my backyard. There she was, leggings, sunglasses, tape measure in hand, snapping photos like paparazzi. Then, in one deliberate motion, she unlatched my gate and left it wide open. That gate kept my world safe. It kept Gavel, Harold's old tabby cat, safe. When I came home that night, Gavel was gone. I searched for 3 days. My voice went raw, calling his name through alleys, the cold biting at my lungs. When the vet finally called, my hands trembled so hard I dropped the phone. Gavel was barely alive, broken ribs, dehydration, trauma. The vet said he'd been chased by machinery, maybe leaf blowers. My security footage confirmed it. Bryn's landscaping crew had arrived an hour after she left, chasing him through the open gate until he collapsed in a storm drain. That wasn't HOA enforcement anymore. That was cruelty. And Bryn Sterling had just turned my grief into righteous fury. I filed criminal charges that night for trespassing, animal cruelty, and harassment. Then I made a call to an investigative journalist friend who loved nothing more than taking down suburban dictators. By morning, every news outlet in Colorado knew the story. The headline read, "Judge versus HOA, when power turns criminal." And that was just the beginning. The morning after my story hit Channel 7, Pinewood Estates erupted like a hornet's nest. Cars slowed in front of my burned-out fence. Neighbors whispered on driveways, and someone had nailed a sign to the HOA office door that read in bold red paint, "Justice for Gavel." By noon, my inbox overflowed with messages, support from residents, legal offers from firms who'd seen the broadcast, even donations for vet bills. It was surreal, watching strangers rally around a cat that symbolized something much larger. Every person Bryn Sterling had crushed under her designer heel. But Bryn wasn't finished. The woman responded the way bullies always do, by doubling down. The next morning, I received a certified envelope thicker than a law textbook. It was from the Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission. A formal complaint had been filed against me, accusing me of abusing my authority to intimidate law-abiding homeowners. The signature at the bottom, Bryn's. I stared at the document until the words blurred. Then my phone began buzzing. Political blogs had picked it up, twisting the story into "Activist Judge Harasses HOA President." Overnight, my 20-year career was dragged through the mud. Commenters who couldn't spell jurisprudence called for my resignation. Bryn had turned public opinion into her weapon. But I wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was met by a silver-haired woman holding a tin of cookies and a knowing smile. "Judge Blackwood?" she asked softly. "I'm Patricia Donnelly. You can call me Pat." I nodded, recognizing her name from the old FBI briefings. Financial Crimes Division, retired. She stepped inside like she'd done it 1,000 times before, eyes scanning my walls, my desk, my folders. She smelled faintly of vanilla and cold coffee, the scent of sleepless investigations. "I've been watching Bryn for weeks," she said, setting the cookies down. "She's not just an HOA tyrant, she's a professional con artist. She's done this before, in Arizona, California, Michigan. Different names, same playbook. Manipulate, intimidate, cash out." My throat went dry. "You're saying this is organized?" Pat nodded and opened a folder thick with photos and financial printouts. Rebecca Ashworth of Phoenix, Beth Sterling of Scottsdale, Sandra McKenzie of Detroit. All the same woman. Each time, she builds power inside an HOA, drives families out, embezzles community funds, files inflated insurance claims after accidents, and vanishes before the smoke clears. "I think you're her next payout." Quote. The photos blurred as I flipped through them. Burned houses, weeping families, news clippings, my name written in her notes, my address highlighted. Pat pointed to one image of an insurance form. "She's already filed preliminary claims for increased safety concerns and electrical risk spread from neighboring property." "That's your house she's describing, Judge." The room spun. Bryn hadn't just been harassing me, she'd been prepping me. The trespasses, the inspections, the open gate, all part of a larger plan. "She's setting you up," Pat said flatly, "to burn your house down and claim her insurance money when the fire spreads." Quote, I gripped the edge of Harold's desk until my knuckles turned white. The weight of it, his memory, our home, pressed on me like a stone. My house wasn't just my refuge anymore. It was her next crime scene. Pat leaned back, her expression calm but deadly. "We can stop her. But we have to move fast and by the book. You know how to build a case. I know how to take down financial predators. Together, we can gut her entire operation." Quote. That night, Harold's old study became our war room. The smell of burned paper still lingered from the destroyed letters, mixing with the scent of Pat's cold coffee and my anxiety. Walt joined us, bringing neighborhood records and statements from half the residents Bryn had victimized. He'd already rallied the community like an old general leading an uprising. We spread the evidence across the table. Fraudulent fines, bank transfers, insurance documents, fake HOA invoices, each paper a nail in Bryn's coffin. By dawn, we had enough proof to wake half of Colorado's law enforcement network. Pat called in favors. Federal agents from the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit, state investigators, even 2 of her former FBI colleagues. The excitement in her voice was chilling. She's about to go from president to prisoner. I spent the next morning drafting formal complaints for the Attorney General, the Real Estate Commission, and the Department of Justice. My judicial training guided my pen like a scalpel. Every sentence was designed to wound, not bleed, to cut deep and clean where it mattered most. But Bryn must have sensed the walls closing in, because by the next week, she escalated again. 2 unmarked trucks rolled into Pinewood in the middle of the day. Men in coveralls unloading large equipment onto my lawn while Bryn stood nearby with that same smug smile. I watched through my security feed, my pulse pounding as one man laid hoses and metal canisters near the electrical box. When I called out, she smiled sweetly for the cameras. "Judge, we're performing an emergency safety inspection. You should be thanking me." The local fire inspector, Jake Morrison, arrived not long after, tipped off by Bryn's anonymous report. He was a veteran investigator, eyes sharp from decades of spotting arson. After 5 minutes of examining the scene, his expression hardened. "Judge," he said quietly, crouching beside one of the canisters, "these are accelerant patterns. Somebody's trying to make this place look like a fire hazard." He turned to Bryn. "Ma'am, this isn't an inspection. It's a setup." She tried to bluff. "You must be mistaken. We're simply—" Morrison straightened, holding up his department-issued body camera. "I suggest you stop talking. Everything you say is being recorded." Her lips twitched, but she couldn't resist. She slipped a white envelope across his clipboard. "I'm sure we can handle this quietly." He took one look at the cash inside and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. You've just added federal bribery to your list." I'll never forget her face. Shock, fear, then pure rage, the moment she realized the game was over. By the time dusk fell, federal agents were already circling her mansion like wolves. Pat had called it in. The evidence was overwhelming. Accelerants, fraudulent paperwork, money transfers, and now an attempted bribe caught on camera. But Bryn wasn't the type to go quietly. That night, as I sat in Walt's living room, the hum of my new security system in the background, I watched the footage one last time, the men planting accelerants, Bryn directing them with a smirk. And I knew what was coming next. The fire. It was just a matter of time, and I was ready. The explosion woke me before dawn. One second I was asleep in Walt's guest room. The next, the world outside turned orange. The windows rattled, the air filled with the deep, hollow roar of something too big to be accidental. My pulse hammered as I stumbled to the window. What I saw turned my stomach to ice. My house, Harold's house, was an inferno. Flames clawed at the sky, thick smoke billowed into the early morning dark, and the sound of cracking timber echoed like gunfire. The roses we planted together, the cedar fence I'd built in his memory, even the old porch swing where we'd planned our retirement, all gone, swallowed by fire. Walt burst through the door half-dressed, his pipe still in hand. "Judge, it's your place!" By the time we reached the streets, sirens were wailing from every direction. The night air was cold and tasted of ash and gasoline. Firefighters shouted orders, hoses hissed, and neighbors gathered in shocked silence. I stood there barefoot in my robe, watching 28 years of love and memories disappear. But I wasn't crying. Because I knew this wasn't an accident. It was evidence. Fire Marshal Jake Morrison arrived within minutes, eyes narrowed as he scanned the chaos. "Judge, get back," he said, then leaned close. "I've already called federal arson investigators. This isn't a random fire. I can smell accelerant from here." I nodded numbly, the weight of his words confirming what I already knew. By dawn, the fire was out, and investigators combed through the wreckage. My security system's fireproof casing had survived, thank God. And when they recovered the footage, it told the whole story. 2:47 a.m., two unmarked trucks parked outside my house. 3:10 a.m., Bryn's husband entered the property carrying accelerant containers. 3:17 a.m. ignition. And the kicker? At 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes before the explosion, Bryn had filed a preliminary insurance claim, citing expected fire damage from neighboring property. She'd filed for the payout before the fire even started. The investigators didn't have to say it out loud, but I could see it in their faces. She'd planned to kill me. Neighbors gathered around me with coffee and blankets, their faces lit by the glow of dying embers. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed my hands, tears running down her cheeks. "She tried to murder you, Judge." Everyone saw her people setting up those trucks. And then, as if fate had a cruel sense of humor, Bryn arrived. She showed up at the fire scene wearing her signature leggings and sunglasses, pretending to wipe away tears. "This is such a tragedy," she said to the nearest news camera, voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's why we need stricter safety standards. If the judge had listened to our inspections, maybe this wouldn't have happened." Every firefighter froze, every agent turned, because they all knew. FBI agents had been monitoring her since the bribery incident. Her arrival, her statement, all of it was being recorded. Within hours, the warrants were signed. At sunrise, federal marshals raided the Sterling estate. They took Bryn, her husband, her inspection crew, and every scrap of evidence that tied them to a nationwide web of fraud and arson. The charges piled up faster than paperwork on a Monday docket. Insurance fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, bribery, conspiracy, arson, attempted murder of a federal judge, RICO violations. By evening, she was in custody, and Pinewood Estates was buzzing with the news. The tyrant was finally in chains. The fire smell still clung to me days later as I sat in my temporary office, reviewing files from agents and prosecutors. My hands shook with exhaustion, but my heart felt steady. Justice was no longer an idea. It was in motion. 1 week later, Bryn walked into my courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her designer athleisure. The sight was surreal. Her hair, once perfect, was dull. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal's. The courtroom was packed. Federal agents, journalists, neighbors, victims from 4 states. The Rodriguez family sat in the front row holding each other's hands. Walt stood near the back, jaw set like a man witnessing divine retribution. I wasn't on the bench that day. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over the arraignment, her calm voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The people of the United States versus Bryn Ashworth Sterling," she read. "Also known as Bethany Sterling, also known as Rebecca Ashworth, also known as Sandra Mackenzie." The list of charges took nearly 5 minutes to finish. Attempted murder, arson, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, witness protection violations. The kind of list that ends with a person's life spent behind bars. Bryn's public defender made a weak plea for bond. "My client is a respected community member." Federal prosecutor Amanda Stevens rose from her seat. "Your Honor, this defendant attempted to murder a sitting federal judge, burned down her home, and defrauded hundreds of families across 4 states. She is not a respected anything." The gallery murmured with approval. Then Bryn made her final mistake. She stood up, arrogance blazing through her fear. "This is a witch hunt. That woman," she jabbed a finger at me, "used her position to ruin me. She's the criminal here." Quote. Judge Morrison didn't even blink. "Mrs. Sterling, you will sit down and remain silent. This court recognizes you as a domestic terrorist who weaponized community authority for personal gain. Bond is denied. Remand to federal custody pending trial." The gavel struck, sharp and final. The applause that followed was thunderous. Bryn's glare met mine as marshals cuffed her wrists. "You think this ends me?" she hissed. I smiled coldly. "No, Mrs. Sterling. It ends you forever." She was sentenced 8 months later, life without parole. Her husband got 25 years for conspiracy. Every stolen dollar was recovered. Every victim compensated. Pinewood changed after that. Walt became HOA president, implementing transparency rules that made corruption impossible. Monthly financial reports went public, fines were capped at $50, and any hint of discrimination meant immediate removal from the board. The community healed. We even created the Judge Harold Blackwood Memorial Scholarship, funded by restitution from Bryn's seized assets. Its first recipient? Maria Rodriguez, studying community law at Harvard. 2 years later, my rebuilt home stood taller than before, painted the color Harold once called sunrise honey. The roses bloomed again, and Gavel, miraculously recovered, slept on the new windowsill. I sipped coffee on my porch as the morning light touched the rebuilt fence and thought about how far justice had come. Some battles burn you down to the ashes, but if you fight smart and fight fair, you rise stronger. For anyone out there dealing with an HOA tyrant or power-drunk neighbor, hear this: document everything, unite your neighbors, and never back down. Bullies win through silence. Justice wins through courage. And in Pinewood Estates, justice won permanently.